Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are so glad to have you here with us today. My name is Lauren Lefkowitz. I'm an executive coach with Fine as a Trap Coaching, and I have 20 years of corporate HR experience before I left corporate HR to start my own business. I am so happy to be here with you today. We have a great discussion in store. For the topic, Cultivating Resilience, Building a Foundation of Mental Well-Being and Adaptability in Corporate Culture. In a moment, I will welcome our panelists to the stage. But before I do that, I would love to ask you to join us in the conversation and put your comments in the chat and let us know what you're thinking, what questions come up, what ideas you have, what you want to comment on. We'll try to bring that into the conversation too. So without further ado, I would love for the two panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Delia, and then we'll move on to Wagner, and tell us who you are, what you do, and what brought you to this topic.
Sure. So I'm Delia Turner. I am a Canadian who lives in Portugal, and I'm currently a VP of People for a startup here in Portugal. And what brought me to the topic, it's a topic that I find super important. I've always found it important, but ever since the pandemic, it becomes even more important for companies and cultures to really focus on the well-being of their employees, particularly when it comes to their mental well-being. So being able to have that be a topic that we talk about and facilitate is it's one of my passion areas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wagner Denuso here. I started my career as a psychotherapist, so my clinical background leads to this conversation, but I spent a lot of my career in leadership development, management development for Fortune 500 companies. And most recently, I was doing future of work capabilities for Prudential Financial. And now I'm launching a book coming soon, hopefully. About leadership, because at the end of the day, we are talking about leadership skills and cultivating skills that are going to make you successful, regardless of your position. So to me, resilience is a great topic to start because resilience has to be adaptive. So, in my view, this conversation could lead to new ways of approaching this that might make life a little more cohesive. So, I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Terrific. So glad to have you both here with me. And apologies, we didn't get to meet before the panel began, so I pronounced both of your names incorrectly. But but here we go. So as we are starting this discussion, if we'll all keep ourselves on mute so we don't have any background noise when we're not speaking, and then we can just take ourselves off of mute when we're ready to speak and keep an eye on each other so that we all get to be in the conversation. Cool. So we're going to start with just talking about cause, right? So we're in a position in this conversation where we're going to be talking about cultivating resilience. But before we cultivate resilience, before we build these foundations of mental well-being, adaptability, and forward motion, we often are starting from a place where we're already backwards. We're already in burnout. We're already in an environment that is unhealthy. So what do you each think might be the causes, the root causes of burnout or a lack of resilience?
Who's going to come off mute first? I will. So Lauren, I think a lot of it comes from, the society today where everyone has their computer in their pocket. Everyone is always available. Everything needs to be answered and, available immediately. And so there is a huge expectation, not just within companies, but everywhere, that you're always going to be available. You're always going to be on. You're always going to be contactable, that you're going to be able to get a response right away. And so from the work perspective, we've moved from 9 to 5 to the expectation of 9 to 5 in a written contract. But what in reality happens is people are constantly working. They wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is check their email. The last thing they do before going to bed at night is sending off, one last chat. And I think that leads to that inability to be able to have a break. The technology interrupts your sleep patterns, so you're not even getting the refreshment on a day-to-day basis. So I would start there.
And we have our colleague Carly. Welcome.
Thank you.
We are
Thank you. I had a little bit of technical difficulty, but I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation with y'all.
awesome. We are talking about what's causing us to start discussing this topic. And Dalia was talking about technology and everything. I think that is true. But there is an internal process that we are all going through about confidence, being confident in our capabilities, our skills to deal with what's happening around us. The context has changed dramatically. If technology was advancing at the pace of our capabilities, would be one thing, but now technology is accelerating to an impossible speed. So the speed of human capabilities to manage, cope, reflect, and respond is being triggered because now things are happening too fast for us to be able to respond appropriately. So I think there is an internal work that is happening that's leading to burnout. We are not feeling capable of knowing everything. We are not capable of really forming a projection of what the future looks like because I don't think we can. So it's unpredictable. So internally, we are dealing with a lot of ambiguity, a lot of, and somebody said the other day, frustration is a result of misalignment in expectations. And I love that because it's misaligned. Everything right now is moving. So I love that we are going to be talking about this because adaptive resilience is the right way of talking about this. It's not just say, oh, I know how to handle this. No, you don't, because it's a different situation. So resilience is not a rigid way of reacting to things. is an adaptive way of responding to things. So that's where I would start. Carly, so what do you think is causing the burnout?
Oh, I have so much to say on this topic. Okay, a couple things. Well, we were burned out before the pandemic. So now we've just had even more complexity, more pressure, and frankly, there's no judgment in this, but most of us were not doing our inner work. I've spent a decade, looking at what are the qualities that actually create a conscious, inclusive leader. And it's all about what we're cultivating on the inside, because that's what shows up on the outside. I wrote a book on this topic. I've gone deep into the weeds of the research on it. And I would say to really focus on equipping ourselves and then our organizations to be more adaptive. I love that word of adaptive resilience, because we're constantly adapting, because things are always changing. And I started a meditation practice when I was 19. So one of the first things that I've learned in studying Buddhism, and this is not just indicative to Buddhism, but impermanence is the constant. Like nothing is ever going to stay the same. In fact, all of our cells are regenerating right now. Like what we were doing 2 seconds ago is different in our bodies than science has proven this. Our brains are constantly shifting. That's where neuroplasticity came from. It's malleable. So what's exciting about that is that what we focus on right now, the present moment, will actually allow us to step into that next right, appropriate response, not the reactive response, which is leading more from, fear. And I don't have it figured out. And I think what's going to equip us to really move through this complexity is to identify, okay, what do I need to do for me right now? Like, how am I equipping myself with the practices for psychological and physiological well-being? And then extending that outward to our supervisors. We got to manage up. We got to manage down. We got to manage laterally, because we are not going to figure this out with one leader. We have to manage, I think, laterally and lead together. This is the time where we're coming together, because nobody knows. Are we going forward? Are we going backward? How do we figure this out? We have to reinvent the wheel. So as I shared, I have a lot to say on this, and I could go into more granularity on what I think practices individually and collectively we could really implement. Some are being implemented, but it has to be across the board. There has to be accountability. We have to create real structure within the workday that is not just a check in the box. Yeah, go meditate. Well, where's the time to do that? We have back-to-back meetings. I think there has to be a lot of intentionality and follow-up and accountability. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yes, we're going to get into all of that. We're going to get into a little bit of the individual how-tos, the more global how-tos. We do have a couple of comments in the chat, and one person pointed to AI, fast-paced world of AI technology, which Wagner, you talked about technology, and Dahlia, you talked about connectivity. But there is such an individual piece to this. So as you think about, before we talk about cultivating resilience across an organization and that adaptability and shifting, let's talk a little bit about the point that Carly brought up, which is what are the individual skills, and whether that is tactically, whether that is from a place of being, whether that is from how you present yourself to others. What are some things that we can do individually to each prioritize and cultivate greater psychological and physiological well-being so that we are prepared for resilience?
I can chime in, but I want to give everybody else a chance to also speak to that.
We'll all have an opportunity to answer every question. So go right ahead, Carly.
Okay. Well, this is one that I've done a lot of research on, and that I try as much as I possibly can to practice. So I think meditation is a game changer. I think folks that weren't meditating before the pandemic have really realized that, oh my gosh, I need to do this. With everything, coming, there's just so much research, and I've been part of some of the long-standing research, really looking at the long-term benefits of meditation on psychological, physical well-being, on our cortisol response, on telomere length, which is connected to our, basically chronological health. I mean, I could go on and on. Most of us know that it decreases depression, anxiety, helps with relationships, self-awareness, empathy, emotional intelligence, like all the things that we want people to be leading from. And Enrique and I, he was on my podcast a few weeks ago, and he was referencing, I'm trying to feed the good wolf. So there's kind of this story. It's an old Buddhist proverb which speaks to, what is the wolf that you're feeding? The positive thoughts versus the negative, the disempowering thoughts, the fearful thoughts, right? Those are all here. It's good to acknowledge them, but we don't necessarily want to be leading from that place. And so I would say starting a meditation practice, there's so many different practices. I'd be happy to share more on that. I also think it's important that we're getting enough sleep. If we're not getting enough sleep, we're not going to be able to bring our best. And then how are we taking care of the body? Like, what foods are we eating? Organics are going to be way better for us than most of the crops in our country that are really covered in pesticides. There's a lot of science around that too. And I'm just going to plug this fabulous, fabulous film that I want everybody to see. I just saw it 2 weeks ago. It's called Common Ground. You can go to the link. I'm actually going to be interviewing the producers on my podcast in a few weeks, but they are challenging the Farm Bill to be able to really scale regenerative agriculture. So that goes back to physiological well-being. How are we feeding, this body temple? And then how are we moving? Like, when are we taking breaks from our screen and focusing on our connection to nature? Nature has been found to be incredibly beneficial psychologically, physiologically, even looking, at a tree, for example, a body of water. I actually write about this in my book. If you're looking at a body of water, that increases your psychological well-being. But then I also think one more thing that we need to be mindful of is who is in our general sphere? Like, who are we surrounding ourselves with? In our workplace, like in our team. This is why we want to be checking with our team members. Like, how are we lifting them up? How are we making sure they're okay? And what's happening on the home front? What are our networks for support, whether they're in proximity to where we live, or are we able to connect with those folks, virtually? I think it's super important that we're creating a circle of support that is nourishing to our psychological and physical well-being.
I agree with what Carly says. And I think the things that I would really pull out from a business perspective is really thinking about, what are those skills that are going to allow you to be present? And I think that too often we're in meetings and we're emailing, or we're having a conversation on our phone pings and we'll take a look at that. And that switching is not helpful. So being able to find ways and to create environments where you're really able to focus, where you're really able to be present, where you have those rules of engagement in your company, where when we're in this meeting, we're in this meeting. And it doesn't have to be an hour long. If we can get through it and I'll be present for 20 minutes, that's great. And then, as Carly said, movement. Too often, even before, but even more so now, we spend all day sitting in front of a computer screen, and finding those times to get up, to take a break, to move the body, and so that you're able to get that different perspective, to step away. I'm a big one on the finding time to be really present when you're in the meeting, but also finding those times to get away and to just let everything refresh. And I think there are a lot of expectations and cultural norms that get in the way of both of those things.
I think you guys cover it. One thing that I've been thinking about is start where the client is, right? That's in my social work history. You start where they are. And for some folks, having practices, and I believe in sharing practices, they don't feel that they can. I think we need to establish a norm that there is no shame and there is no guilt for not being able to do it. I think it would be easier for us to support where people are, because nobody's having a great time right now. And to pretend that we can transform ourselves through practices, and I do meditation, I truly believe in everything you said, Carly, but we need also to go back and bring the people who don't feel that they can yet. And I think for those who are listening, and sometimes you don't feel you can, one thing that I keep saying, and I think is true, clarity creates capacity. So when we say we don't have capacity, we don't have time, is because our minds are filled with self-limiting beliefs, thoughts, and the rumination that's part of life right now. So one thing that I think it is helpful is just notice what you're thinking. Notice of where your thoughts are leading, because chances are you are worried and anxious about anticipating the future. The future is not here. To Carly's point, stay present is the best solution for anything. Viktor Frankl always talk about this, right? Between the stimuli and your response, there is a pause. In that pause is your power to respond well, and your freedom is there too. So think about those things, but don't feel guilty and unable to do it, because a lot of people that I talk to says, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm too anxious to do that." So start with that. What is making you anxious? What are the reality in your context that's making you feel that way? And usually it's long-term reactions that we adapt to, because that's how we respond to the world. That's when emotional well-being comes into play, right? We need to think about our emotional health first. So I would start there.
Thank you so much. We're getting wonderful comments in the chat here about resilience, about meditation, about self-care. One person commented to Wagner's point that, things are changing and out of your control, except for you. You get to decide how to care for yourself. And one of the things that I heard in what each of you were saying was that there are always going to be outside forces that are coming at us, and we get to notice, then decide, and then do. And as you pointed out, Wagner, with Viktor Frankl's commentary, that the power is in the pause. And so often we don't pause, and we think resilience comes in the form of getting things done, right? And so so as we're talking about doing things, I know I posted in our private chat what my next question would be, but I'd love to talk about accessibility to these different practices. And so, Carly, I know you have some frameworks you might be able to share that you mentioned, but for each of you, having worked in different ways, and I know as an HR practitioner myself, there were times when it was just so busy and everything was reactionary, and that felt like resilience. There were other times when I had the opportunity to do some self-focus and inner work, and come at things from a different way. So if we're working now today with an audience of listeners who are in one of those extremes or somewhere in the middle, what are some ways to really bring this into practice, no matter where you are?
Yeah, I love with meeting people where they are, and I think it's also important to challenge where we are. So if someone says I can't do that, who told you that? You did. Yeah. And so what if we could explore what if? Like just even that question, what if? I wonder how. I wonder what could be possible right now, right? The other question that's often helpful for me, and I have this actually again written in chapter 3 of my book, which is on resilience and having that growth mindset, is okay, what is the challenge? And what do I have control of? What do I have control of right now? Not in the future, but right now, because how we respond right now actually impacts the future. And where do I need to get support, right? Which might be I ask for help, which often, is going to support us through that challenge. So, what if? What is the challenge? And therefore, how do I want to respond in this moment? And then the other one that I often ask is when something really difficult is happening, I'll say, how is this for me? Not why is this happening to me, but how is this for me? And I'll just bring this home, y'all, because I have had to move every 4 to 6 months for the last 3 years. Oh, yes. It has been this constant movement, and it's been a real practice of letting go. And there's reasons for that. Some of it has been my choice, but every time it happens, it's an opportunity for me to grow and for me to find a better opportunity. What's happening right now that is causing me to have to move is that my housemate, unfortunately, is being challenged with the fact that her 2 sisters are dying of stage 4 cancer right now. And she needs space in the house to grieve. And I work from home, as you can see. And I want to honor that. And I want to give her space. But I just moved in not that long ago. And I love it. But I have to figure out a different configuration, whether I have an office outside or I'm physically moving. So that just happened on Sunday. And I'm like, okay, how is this for me? This is going to be great. We're going to figure out something new, right? Who do I reach out to in my new community to help me find this? It's all going to work out. But that's my narrative. And that helps me show up the best. And I've brought a lot of this in. I know, Lauren, you asked this and I didn't actually share it. I have supported lots and lots of different companies in learning, leadership development, and culture. And I often am exclusively partnering with senior stakeholders and really, trying to figure out what their people problems are, looking at people analytics. I'm currently interviewing for internal roles, actually doing this work internally with one special company and team because I don't want to be running a business anymore, even though it's been awesome. And I've also brought a lot of these tools and these frames to students at Stanford. I'm also volunteering at the Mindfulness Club at UC Santa Barbara right now, helping our younger leaders with these tools and frames because they're feeling really discombobulated as well. So I hope that those are helpful. I also have 15 free meditations that are linked to different conscious leadership capabilities on my website. If you just go to carlyhaupt.com resources, those are free. Those are for everybody. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Carly. I think those are so helpful to see. Reality is complex for most of us. And I think this is where we need to go. One thing that I've been sensing is that organizations are not going to be able to completely support you because organizations are very complex. I think what we need to start thinking is that this regenerating leadership and our practice of generative it speaks to sustainability. When you think about organizations being a living organism, think about yourselves as being exposed to so many elements naturally and unnaturally, when you are part of an organization, becomes very critical that you try not to compartmentalize your personal, professional, and different things, because that might give you relief momentarily, but does not integrate your reality in a way that you can continuously live a life of resilience. Because let's be real, we all have dark secrets, we have our shadow selves, we have self-doubts, the imposter syndrome. I can go on and on. I think we all know them. The idea is to normalize all of them, normalize all these experiences you have, because that's a good practice too. You might not feel that others have so many difficulties and challenges yourself, but the reality is it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what others are experiencing. Collectively, I think we are experiencing an emergence of a consciousness. And this consciousness is about, hey, everything is interconnected. We're all interconnected in this call, in this community. So how might we behave in a way that benefits the collective? And I think that's where leadership is going. Collective leadership is the way forward. Now, I wouldn't rely on senior leaders because they're too busy trying to figure it out if you're going to return to work or not. So I wouldn't rely on senior executives right now, because it's never a good idea to look up for a solution. It doesn't work that way. What works is for you to be certain about, what do you believe in? How do you want to be treated? How do you want to treat others? And rely on the people that you trust, because support is something that comes and goes, and different people have offered different support. But I think it's within us. This time we need to know that no one is having a great time. So how might we collectively overcome this? I think that's the secret, you know?
And I can't get the mute off. Sorry about that. I was trying. I think that's really important. And I would pull on two things that both Carly and Wagner alluded to. And it comes to what is within your control. And I think that it's within our control to be aware of it for ourselves. But it's also within our control to be having those conversations and to be initiating those conversations with the people within our sphere at work. So if we're part of a leadership team, talking about it within the leadership team. If we're not part of a leadership team, talking about it with our client groups, talking about it with the people that report into us. And being able to, bring forward the topic, which a lot of people don't want to talk about, which is that, things are complex right now. It can be overwhelming. And let's break it down to what can we focus on? Because there's, I talk about how work is a gas. It's going to give up, it's going to take up as much space as you allow it to take up. So helping people to understand where their limits are and to help equip them to stay within those limits and to learn how to push back as their limits are being stretched by others, I think are skills that we can be helping with. And then within the spheres that we control, doing what you can to bring in those great questions that Carly talked about, or, instigating breaks or reminding people about working too long, and, doing what you can to, you may not be able to change the entire company, but you can change that little sphere of influence that you have. And for some people, it's going to be more broader reaching. And for some people, it's just going to be themselves because they're an individual contributor, and that's fine. But being able to figure out where you have that influence and being able to put that in play for yourselves.
Thank you so much. We've spent the first half of this conversation really digging into individual contribution, and we've touched a little bit on some facets of you can only count on yourself, right? And we know that we start with ourselves. We start with us, and there's a saying that you put your own oxygen mask on first before helping another passenger in the event of an emergency. And all of these ways that we've talked about in terms of the individuality, that's the oxygen mask. We also know that no matter what level you're at in a company, and I think today we're talking to some mid-level contributors, we're talking to some executive contributors, and we're talking to people who care about this and who want to spread this. And we all know that when a new person joins a group, that new person has the potential to drag everybody down or lift everybody up, right? And everything in between. So when we are talking about the sort of organization-wide, or at least team-wide, building of resilience, adaptability, mental well-being, what can leaders do? And when I say the word leader, I don't just mean your executive leader. I mean you who are listening to this today, you are a leader because you're caring enough to come into this conversation and take some sort of initiative. So what can leaders do to cultivate resilience across their organizations as a cultural norm?
Lauren, I think there's something about leading by example and being able to be, self-aware yourself, being able to understand, what are your triggers? How are you feeling? Having that vulnerability to talk about it when you're having struggles so that you're signaling to others that it's okay. To bring it to the forefront whenever possible, to be aware of what's going on in your team's lives, not just the work lives, but the broader lives as well. Because as Wagner said, you can't compartmentalize. If you have something big going on at home, you're having to move for the 6th time in 18 months, that's obviously going to be impacting what's happening at work. So being able to be aware of it and talk about it and make it normal that that's okay to talk about it. And then again, I'm going to come back to the breaks, but I think that it's also really important to be finding that time to be away. And I think that too often when people are on their time off, and I could go on. I'm in Europe. I have European time off. I don't think the US has enough time off, which I think is part of the challenge. 2 to 3 weeks isn't enough, let alone if they'll take it, let alone if they get the time away to actually step away and not be contacted. But, I'm really deliberate with my teams about when they're on break, they're on break. And, one of my favorite things to do, and my team gets caught every single time, is, if I happen to be online because I have a late meeting, I'll ping them and I'll just go, "Hey, Lauren, how are you doing?" And invariably, Lauren will write back and go, "Hey, Dahlia, need something?" And I'll write back, "No, that was a test and you failed again." Come on, guys, don't work outside of, you know me. I'm not going to bug you about work. So, just being able to be that person, because those signals set the norm that it's okay that they're not working at 10 o'clock at night, that it's okay that they're taking a break, that it's okay that something's going on in their life and that it's impacting them. And it's more likely then that they will give themselves permission. Because I think a lot of times what happens in work is work dictates what people feel comfortable allowing themselves to do. And we need that space. We need to be able to be our full selves. And if the work environment and culture isn't allowing them to do that, it gets in the way of everything.
So what I would say too, and Dahlia, sounds like it's fun to be in your team. It is about the energy you bring. I think about leadership as energy. How do you manage your energy? All kinds of energy. Because you come into a room. I love this quote from someone at IBM, an executive once said. She said, "A good leader works as a thermometer. You get in the room, you sense the temperature and things like that. A great leader is a thermostat." And I love that comparison because it's exactly that. What kind of energy you're bringing to the environment you are in? And for those of you who think that leadership is so special, leadership is not special. Leadership belongs to all of us. Leadership is something that you can train yourself to become a great leader. You can be much more conscious of how you're leading your own lives just by understanding and accepting. So I want to go back to acceptance. As a leader in an organization, you need to accept you might not have the impact that you desire to have, but what you can bring is enough to have an impact on one person, two people, because as a leader, you have the obligation to deal with yourself. You have the obligation to understand how the emotional turmoil that you might be going in is impacting others. So to be a leader is to be self-aware. To be a leader is to be conscious of where you are and what kind of situation you are in, because the world is so diverse today. You're not going to react the same way just because people are going through the same situations. Each person has a different reality. Accept that and move forward. Now, as organizational leaders, also, you have to allow people to co-create the reality with you. Don't try to provide solutions that only work for yourself. Work with people and identify what works for them. So it's a co-creation process that's iterative. It's always dynamic. That's what I would say.
Wonderful. The comments are flying in. It's great conversation in the comments. And there's a comment from Shay who says, lead from every seat, care about your colleagues. And this is what all three of you have just talked about a little bit. Invest in being curious, find out each other's values. What are the norms and contra behaviors of norms? What are we looking for, right? And each individual is different. And something that I often find with my own clients is that we make up stories, right? We make up stories about what is true. And we decide more commonly that people will not be receptive to our ideas than that they will. We have a negativity bias as humans. So if we set aside what we think the reality is for a moment, and we're in a healthy enough environment that our leadership is waiting for us to come in and tell them what adaptability looks like, what resilience looks like, what well-being looks like within our organizations. What is that? What does adaptability look like in a receptive organization?
So I'd love to kind of go from the last one. How do we each show up as leaders, right? Because yes, we all are leaders. We all have the opportunity and responsibility to lead around something that we care about. And also then moving it into this question, what does adaptability look like within the organization and team to increase mental well-being? I mean, frankly, it comes back to what so many of us are talking about and what a lot of chief people officers are saying is the number one leadership capacity or competency, I should say, which is empathy. And so if we can, and this goes back to what you were just saying, Lauren, about our unconscious biases, I think it's really important that we all are trying to get a sense of what might the other person be experiencing right now. And how can I show up to create even more safety for that person to actually share what's really true, what's really happening? I was talking to a colleague of mine on Saturday that I adore, and she works in this space, very, very senior, L&D leader. And she has a really strong Jewish identity. And she was sharing with me her trauma around what is coming up. Based on, the war that's happening in Palestine and Israel. And I just held space. I held space. I had no judgment. I don't believe that one group is better than the other, or that I'm not siding with Palestine. I'm not siding with Israel. That's just me in this state. And I just didn't need to have any real opinion. I just held space for her experience and her need to share what she needed and how it was impacting her and how it was affecting her. And I think if we can really create a psychologically safe space with our team members, with our supervisor, we have no idea what's happening for them, with the folks that are reporting to us, with even the C-suite. How do we create that safety and really, make it okay for people to disagree with us, frankly? Okay, so I have this view and you have this one. And that's frankly why we're at war. Like, can we not throw bombs? Can we talk about it? Can we actually recognize that we're all here to collaborate, to live in peace? We all want that. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit on a soapbox here. I'm bringing in the the collective into the minutia, but it's all connected, right? It's all connected. And that's what's beautiful about the workplace is it's a microcosm of the greater world. Like, how do we create healing here? And I think it goes into, we have to acknowledge that we all have individual trauma. We all have collective trauma. We all have intergenerational trauma. And it all has different flavors. And it is showing up at work, people.
Yeah.
And we need to be trauma informed. And our HR teams need to be trauma informed. And what kind of resources are we availing to people to help them individually, but then to support the collective? Because one of the best ways that we heal trauma, and I've studied this, Thomas Hubel is also another incredible resource. If you folks don't know who he is, he's amazing. And what's unfortunate is he's in Tel Aviv right now, where his physical safety, his family's safety is being threatened. But he has done these global witnessing projects where people share a trauma in a safe space, and trauma has to be witnessed. It has to be acknowledged. It has to be seen. It has to be heard. And that's where the healing can start. And I'm wondering, how do we create that at work? You know, from the way we show up, but then from the structures that we create in the workplace to support that. Because unfortunately, I just see there's going to be more complexities. We're going to have more trauma, even just climate related trauma, because people are going to have to leave their homes because it's not safe. There's a storm, there's a fire, there's no more water. That's going to come into how we're all collaborating. So those are some thoughts I have. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I love what you said, Carly. It's so important for us to have this awareness and consciousness. One thing I would say is this too. Well, the article in New York Times a year ago, I believe, they show that people who have been helping others during crisis are more resilient people because they bear witness. To your point, bearing witness is very important. Now, for those of you listening in HR has to change. HR has to transform. We are way late because we have the tendency to take care of symptoms, but not root causes. So things are out of order. We put processes in place. So now the annual reviews are coming. We are not going to talk about that here, but I'm very worried about what's going to happen with the biases about people who showed up at work and people who just work from home. The year-end performance assessments are going to be really critical for you to gain the trust of your people. So if you are in HR, let go of the process. We don't want 100% completion. What we need is 100% respect, 100% connection. We need to start moving from process, programs, and policies to connections, to community, to collective leadership. And that's what's missing. HR needs to understand human behavior. I went to social work school, so I learned, but HR needs to expand the notion that now the personal is professional and vice versa, because you're treating people. So HR people, start learning about emotional development, because talking about trauma, talking about coping mechanisms, talking about maladaptive behavior, talking about the common affective disorders, all this is important for you to understand. However, I'm saying all this, why? Don't try to rescue people. And that's what we are trained as psychotherapists. We are trained not to rescue. We are trained to bear witness. So it's very hard for anyone to bear witness without trying to save, solve, or support in a way that feels more tangible. But the reality is sometimes just listening, just being with people might be much more helpful. So in an organization that where things are already somewhat more mature, adaptability means allowing yourself to laugh at yourself and get out of yourself. The biggest problem that we have is we're so egocentric in a way. We have to get out of yourselves. You're not better than anyone. Nobody's better than you. And you need to start connecting to what works for the other. And I think the great leaders that I have worked with did exactly that. Sometimes they were just silent, but they helped me tremendously, you know?
I really like the way that you ended that, Wagner, when you talked about, being able to understand where people are at. And I think that there is a need in organizations to be better able to recognize that, to better be able to recognize when someone's doing well and they're in the zone and everything's great, and when they're really struggling and not able to have an impact because of XYZ, which may be the behavior of the leader themselves, which could be impacting that. And so I think there is a need in organizations to be helping our leaders and our managers to be able to better read people face to face or via a connection. And I know that there's been trainings forever. Oh, do you see a change in behavior? Now with Zoom, anyone can fake it for an hour. So you have to be able to find other ways to be able to figure out what's actually going on with the individual. And again, coming back to what I said earlier, being able to have that conversation, being able to ask the questions, and being able to create that place where the difficult is talked about, because I think too often the difficult is glossed over or pushed aside, and everyone just keeps trying to move forward and achieve the goal, forgetting the fact that there's an iceberg in front of you that we're about to hit. And I think that our ability to really be able to recognize and have those real conversations will make us all better people, but I think that the business outcomes will also be incredibly much stronger.
I also wanted to add one more piece. In order for HR folks and leaders to be more equipped to listen, to navigate their difficult emotions, right? Because the only way they're going to be able to show up and be present to someone else's difficult emotions and just be there, not fix, is to really process what's happening on the inside. We have to invest in deeper learning and development. We have to, give people funds to do that. We need to give them time to do that within the workplace and even outside of the workplace. And typically in times of, recession, L&D has been cut. And this is why the number one priority for chief people officers and for HR now is leadership and manager effectiveness. It's always needed to be the number one priority, right? But it's so refreshing to see that companies are now putting out roles for director of L&D, leadership development. More and more are prioritizing that. But I think we need to not only prioritize it, give it funds, but also really give people time to invest in this, so that they can then integrate it and bring it into all of the people connections that they have. So I just wanted to add that.
I think we can go on and on, Carly, because I think you're absolutely right. But there's one more thing too, is we rush sometimes in giving people benefits. I remember in my corporate life, and there's 500 resources for mental health, because we believe in HR benefits that just by overwhelming people with emails, with the resources, that's what we are doing well. We are not doing well. People know how to find the resources. Trust me, if you have the resource available, just say, hey, they are available. You know where to find them. It's here. Fine. But that's not the issue. The issue is, how can we help people build the resilience for themselves? And managers are having a hard time. I'm very empathetic towards managers and senior leaders right now. I talk about senior leaders sometimes jokingly that they should get over their egocentric selves, but it's a lot of pressure on leaders to try to solve for everything. It's a lot of pressures for managers to solve for performance management issues, with the co-location issues, with the team issues. We need to start asking managers, what's important to you right now? What would be the most beneficial supports that we can provide you? We usually don't do that. We have management training. Training for what? Training how to punish people who are not performing well. Training on things that actually don't matter right now. We should ask managers, what do you think matters the most right now for you and your team to build resilience and be able to navigate the future? I think those questions we are not asking, and we should start asking those questions.
I don't disagree with you, Wagner, but I do wonder if they're going to be able to answer the question and really be able to identify what it is that they need. And I think that, you talked about we're too quick to give a benefit. I think we're just too quick, full stop. And, the analogy that I like to use with my leadership team is, remember, we're running a marathon. And when you run a marathon, it's about pace. It's not about the sprint. And sprints will happen, but what are you going to do to get the pace back? And, constantly reminding them about the need to slow down, to go fast, and finding those ways to create the space for people to slow down. Because when everyone's going crazy, you can't think, you can't react, everything's short term. And in order to deal with mental health, you need to be able to think longer term, because the short term and everything that's happening in the short term is often what's getting in the way of us thinking about what's happening and what we need in the long term.
This is such a rich conversation. I could talk to all of you for the rest of the day. But we're coming upon our last few minutes. So I would love to know, one thing that was striking me as we have been going through this conversation is how much actually falls on HR without HR really having as much of the impact that we want to have in some cases. In some cases, HR really is integrated as a partner into the business. In other cases, it's, well, tell us what to do and we'll tell you if we have the budget for it or not, right? And so one of the things that I sometimes see people walking away from a conversation like this with is this misunderstanding that they walk away with all the responsibility. And we cannot have all of the ideas. We cannot have all of the answers. Even if we know better than other people what the resources are that are out there, we cannot grow the assumption for what the organization needs without being willing and able to ask some questions. So in our last couple of minutes here, I would love to hear from each of you. What kinds of questions should we be asking internally as HR practitioners, our leaders, our employees, our colleagues, or where might we add formal review processes to really get some intel from our teams and our employees and our leadership as to what we need in order to cultivate resilience in our organizations?
This is a complicated question, but there is one thing that I always say I think works for all of us in HR too. Be engaged, not attached. That's my motto. Try to be fully engaged with your energy. Put your engagement there. Is the idea of flow. Use your skills to the max. Challenge yourself. I think that's the way we feel good about ourselves, giving all the complexity around us, but not emotionally attached. We get emotionally attached to projects, ideas, to things that we need to do. And HR is not different. So HR needs to stop and start reflecting. What has been the outcomes of all these policies, process, programs that we put in place? And what is the reality today? And start allowing yourselves to trade off. So the key question here today is, what are the trade-offs I'm willing to take on so I can create capacity to focus on what matters the most? I think that's the biggest question.
I'll jump in. That was a great answer, Wagner. So HR has a lot of responsibility, right? But I think it could be really important right now, and is really important, that we do support our leaders and managers with these skills to lead. Because if leaders and managers knew how to support their teams to communicate effectively, collaborate, create psychological safety, then HR wouldn't have to take care of so much. Like it would actually take the burden off of HR and also of the C-suite. I think the question and the practice that we need to be really integrating is, how can we create resilient teams that are self-organizing, where again, it's not one leader and team lead and responsibility, but it's the whole team. We are all supporting each other to lead. It's the leading together. And that's going to look different for every single team and every department and every culture. But that's what I'm excited about, because that's where I think we can create the most positive change and be most adaptive to all the complexity that's going to keep coming.
So Lauren, I have two questions, one for my team and one for leaders. So for my team, I'm constantly asking them, are you teaching people to fish? So are you doing it yourselves, or are you teaching them to fish? Are you teaching them to be able to do it themselves? So that's the one to my team. To my leaders, and this comes back to, getting that psychological safety. I'm constantly, in fact, I don't think I go through a one-on-one where I don't ask the question of them. And so your last communication or your last one-on-one, do you think that your message and the way you delivered it is having the impact that you're expecting? And how do you think that message is being, received by your teams? And how do you know that? And really getting them to be thinking about what they've said, how they've behaved, what they've done, and how that impacts the culture and the way people are feeling. And so, was it received the way you expected it? How do you think they felt? And how do you know that? And constantly getting them to reflect on that. And I do have a leader that has said now, they come out of meetings and they have me in my mind going, Talia is saying, how did that happen? And how do you know? And, those questions they're thinking it themselves. I've become a voice in their head. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What a brave question to ask is, did it have the impact I intended? Because we go in with intention and we come out saying like, I did what I intended, and sort of wipe our hands of it. And so to really reflect on impact is so important. Such an important discussion. The comments are freaking amazing today. And so for those of you who've been in this conversation or watch it in the replay, please connect with each other. When you're connecting in the comments, connect with each other on LinkedIn, connect with us, your speakers, because we build community through community. And the best way to keep building our knowledge, our curiosity, is to be in connection with each other. And to my fellow panelists today, thank you so much. You were so smart and insightful and generous in your sharing. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Keep shining, everyone. Keep that light bright.